Let's be honest, some of you felt it long before it happened. Not with your eyes, but with something ancient that lives deep in your chest. You weren't guessing. You weren't paranoid. You were tapped in. And now that everything is playing out exactly as you sensed, you're not surprised, you're activated. This isn't just a moment, it's a return. A spiritual comeback so accurate, it makes everyone who doubted you start whispering your name like it's sacred. You were never imagining it. You were remembering what your spirit already knew. And now, you're watching the truth unfold like a prophecy you buried in silence years ago. When alignment hits, it doesn't just knock, it echoes. All the warnings you carried in your body have finally stepped into the light. Their tantrums aren't random outbursts, they're the last sparks of pride burning out in someone who can't bear to watch your truth take root. You're witnessing the unraveling of a loud spirit trapped in denial, someone who keeps shouting over their own guilt, hoping the noise will drown out the mirror your rise has become. They're not just talking, they're testifying without realizing it, each word a confession that you were always right, and they were never ready. It didn't start with confrontation, it started with curiosity masked as coincidence. An uninvited fascination crept in through overlooked moments, how your presence silenced rooms without effort, how strangers seemed to know things they shouldn't. You felt it in the pauses, in the way certain words seemed rehearsed, like someone was feeding your life into a hidden system. What emerged wasn't admiration, it was a fixation rooted in envy. A mind spiraling through invisible wires trying to reverse engineer a frequency it was never built to receive. And now, that obsession is collapsing under its own weight, unable to decode a signal that was divinely encrypted. If your heart overflows with God's blessings, let that love shine. Click the super thank you button and give $40 or more to plant seeds of faith that will impact countless lives. Your generosity reflects His abundance. Be a vessel of His grace and watch His kingdom flourish through you. Some people don't want to rise, they want to rearrange someone else's altitude and claim it as their own. They thought your influence was a formula they could mimic, not realizing it was a frequency they could never hold. Their strategy? Scattershot disruption, launched from every angle they thought mattered, your stability, your image, your sense of calm. They assigned roles, built invisible teams, drafted unseen scripts, all for a performance meant to fracture what they didn't understand. But their blueprint wasn't flawed because it was messy. It was flawed because it was based on delusion, not discernment. And all that effort only proved one thing: they steadied your essence more than they ever steadied themselves. While your focus was expansion, theirs was distortion. They weren't building legacy, they were busy building echo chambers, casting you as the villain in a story they fabricated word by word. They didn't gather allies, they assembled projections, selecting those most likely to bleed their own wounds into the narrative. Each recruit was offered a role in a drama built on borrowed rage, as if hurting you would somehow heal them. But illusion has a shelf life. And no matter how loud the chorus, the truth doesn't expire, it rises. Their storyline, designed to confuse, couldn't survive under clarity. Its seams began to split the moment authenticity walked into the room. If you've been touched by God's goodness, don't keep it to yourself. Click super thank you and sow a gift of $40 or more to help spread His light. Your giving becomes a ripple of grace, blessing hearts and building His kingdom. Let His overflow pour through you. Every shaky empire collapses from the inside first. One by one, the people they rallied began to pause, blink, and question. The script wasn't matching the scenes anymore. Curiosity crept in, quiet but dangerous. And when the one sent to dissect your flaws returned with nothing but admiration and contradictions, the infection of doubt spread like wildfire. What they'd hoped would be ammunition turned out to be evidence of your integrity. The illusion cracked not from confrontation, but from within. And those who once screamed the loudest started falling silent, unsure if they were ever on the right side to begin with. The higher you ascended, the more surreal the pace became. It was as if unseen hands kept opening doorways before you even knocked. Events aligned with a precision that defied coincidence, as if the world had quietly reshaped itself to make room for your presence. Support arrived uninvited but right on time, from people who weren't impressed by noise, but drawn to the quiet strength you carry. While confusion spread through the other camp like wildfire in dry leaves, your path became clearer with each step. And the disparity between your peace and their chaos began raising questions even among those who once thought they understood the narrative. Eventually, even the most stubborn illusions begin to rot from within. What started as gossip fractured into fragments of contradicting tales. Eyes widened, voices lowered, and cross-referencing began. Versions of their story that once seemed airtight began falling apart under the weight of their own inconsistencies. What was intended to discredit you slowly unraveled into an indictment of their own intentions. Their attempt to craft a villain backfired, revealing a mirror they weren't ready to look into, and the light shining through those cracks began rewriting the story. Beneath the polished surface of their social performance, fault lines were already deepening. Tensions that had long simmered quietly now surged to the surface like a system under too much strain. Loved ones who once stood by them began raising sharp questions. The emotional toll became impossible to ignore, time drained, trust eroded, resources misplaced. Whispers turned to confrontations. Why was so much effort invested in tearing down someone who simply walked away? Why were priorities restructured around someone they claimed to have let go? The answers never came, and that silence spoke volumes. What followed was not accountability, it was calculation. Hollow apologies disguised as healing poured in, not to mend, but to salvage. The same players who once charged forward in blind loyalty began pulling back the curtain. They named the manipulation. They exposed the hidden strategies, the pressure tactics, the double games. What was once orchestrated in secrecy now stood in the open, stripped of mystery, stripped of power. What they hoped would stay buried became undeniable, and the fallout couldn't be masked by rehearsed words or insincere regret. Every seed they buried in dishonor began sprouting into unmistakable proof of their own unraveling. Where they had once felt untouchable, borders collapsed. Silent rules they danced around too long finally tightened, and this time, the outcomes weren't symbolic, they were concrete. Reputations eroded. Networks disconnected. The very rooms they used to manipulate turned cold with awareness. And the spaces they once used to speak against you became stages for their own exposure. What once echoed with support now sat still with quiet scrutiny. The shift was total and irreversible. The implosion didn't come from confrontation. It came from reflection they never anticipated. When the dust cleared and they had no one left to argue with, the only face staring back at them was their own, tired, hollow, and warped by years of obsession. Every effort poured into your downfall became a mirror, held mercilessly close. The time spent, the energy drained, the plans crafted in the shadows, all of it began to look less like strategy and more like a plea for attention dressed in control. What they had built wasn't a life, it was a room full of regrets with your name taped to the walls. There are thresholds even envy won't cross without cost. And once their typical tricks stopped working, they veered off the map, into tactics meant to shake what they couldn't touch. But the unseen world isn't governed by desperation. They stepped into forces they didn't understand, believing they could command outcomes with nothing but malice and ritual. But the backlash came swift, measured not just in failure, but in amplification. Every intention they hurled bounced off like light from a mirror, returning with added weight. And what they unleashed in secret began to collapse them in public. When control slips, silence becomes the cruelest punishment. They weren't just losing people, they were losing themselves in the vacuum. The days grew quieter, but not peaceful. Surrounded by the echo of their own failed schemes, they became consumed with rehearsing battles that had long since ended. Conversations circled back to the same subject, you. Not out of interest, but out of fixation. They built their identity around your downfall and forgot to build a self in the process. And now, in the absence of an audience, they became the only one left listening to their performance. The collapse wasn't subtle, it was loud in all the wrong ways. Finances dwindled like something slipping through invisible cracks. Promising opportunities slipped out of reach without warning or explanation. What once flowed freely turned sluggish, then stopped altogether. Transactions fell through. Contacts pulled back. Support dissolved. It was as if the very systems they relied on to fund their campaign turned against them in protest. Not because of some grand punishment, but because the frequency of their choices no longer aligned with increase. The taker's energy had been cut off from supply. Everything they did to sabotage your growth became a spotlight that illuminated the very path they hoped to block. What they didn't understand is that when purpose is etched into someone's destiny, opposition only sharpens the trajectory. Their attempts to distort your image made your truth louder. Their schemes to interrupt your progress only underscored your resilience. With every step they took to dim your presence, they unknowingly intensified its reach. They weren't silencing you, they were building a stage for your rise with the very bricks they intended to throw. When illusion runs unchecked, it eventually collides with fact. They thought they were gathering proof to dismantle your credibility, but all their digging led them somewhere they hadn't prepared for. The deeper they looked, the more they found clarity they couldn't deny. They didn't uncover weakness, they stumbled upon a reality so far beyond their assumptions that it destabilized their narrative. What was supposed to be a takedown turned into a revelation, and the realization struck: the story they had believed about you was never real to begin with. Eventually, the facade broke under the weight of its own construction. Leaked details painted a picture they could no longer whitewash. Communications once hidden surfaced in public view. Tangible receipts of their fixation piled up, too many to ignore, too detailed to deny. What was meant to remain under wraps became indisputable evidence. Those who once offered blind loyalty started to question the cost of their allegiance. The web they'd woven for manipulation turned into a map of exposure. The internal fallout bled into every corner of their personal life. Tensions erupted in spaces that were once safe. Trust cracked inside circles they thought were impenetrable. Questions from younger eyes began to burn through the walls of secrecy, questions that couldn't be dismissed without consequence. Bonds weakened under scrutiny. The ripple of their obsession spread beyond the target, contaminating the very relationships they claimed to protect. The line between vendetta and self-destruction disappeared. Their downfall wasn't sudden, it was systemic. Threads began unraveling across all domains simultaneously. Positions that once gave them security grew unstable. Support systems withdrew quietly. Public roles became harder to maintain as patterns became visible. Financial strain increased as their focus stayed fixed on a battle they had already lost. Nothing around them could thrive because everything they touched was filtered through the lens of sabotage. The chaos they launched outward had returned, and this time, it was devouring the architect. What made the unraveling unforgettable wasn't just its scale, it was the elegance of the reversal. Attempts to harm you had the opposite effect. Attacks lost velocity midair and turned inward. Falsehoods twisted into confessions. Schemes reversed course, revealing truths that no amount of denial could bury. While they plotted in secrecy, your growth unfolded in clarity. And the result was undeniable. Every move made against you became proof that no force can dismantle what's been divinely reinforced. Some stories don't end with a bang, they end with a silence so profound it rewrites every sound that came before it. The one who spent their energy trying to dismantle your path is now spoken of only in half sentences and quiet warnings. Not as a villain, but as an example. Their name floats through spiritual spaces like a shadow, attached to the lesson, not the legacy. What surrounds you now isn't a pause before more chaos, it's the clarity that settles once everything unnecessary has been removed. The ones still beside you aren't guessing who you are, they've seen it, felt it, and chosen to stand where truth lives. This was never about simple opposition, it was a public unveiling of what authority truly looks like when it's anchored in something beyond ego. The ones who tried to challenge you didn't just fail, they unraveled themselves piece by piece. What's been revealed is not just your strength, but the source of it, the invisible alignment that makes force obsolete. Those who watched this play out didn't just see a person win, they saw a structure crumble, exposed by the weight of its own fabrication. And the one thing they walked away remembering? Real power doesn't announce itself. It arrives already proven. The most haunting part of their downfall was how loudly it proved your protection. Every attempt to defame you became a spotlight they couldn't redirect. What they aimed at you found no target, only space to rebound and illuminate their own contradictions. Their efforts, far from silencing you, became evidence that echoed in every room. They didn't realize they weren't battling a person, they were colliding with a pattern that had been in motion long before they stepped into it. The lesson? You weren't standing alone. You were being carried. Even in complete collapse, some refused to surrender. The aftermath has settled, but the noise continues, not because they have something left to fight for, but because their identity was built on the conflict. The energy still pulsing through the air isn't power, it's residue. They keep reaching for the volume knob, hoping the sound will change what silence already settled. This was the very outcome you knew would come, a fixation so deep it wouldn't allow them to step away, even when everything else already had. This isn't rebellion anymore, it's dependency. Their inability to detach has nothing to do with principle and everything to do with emptiness. Your presence gave their chaos meaning, and without it, the mirror shows them too much. They aren't defending anything, they're avoiding themselves. The cycle continues not out of strength, but out of habit. And every word they say now strips away another layer of their disguise. No outside voice has to expose them. They're doing it themselves, in real time, for everyone to witness. They followed a path you had already mapped out in your mind, step by obsessive step. Their actions never shocked you, because the patterns were always too familiar. You observed the dissonance between their perception and reality long before it became visible to others. It wasn't guesswork, it was clarity. Now, the unraveling plays out like a script you could have authored yourself. Those once blind to the truth are watching the breakdown with eyes wide open, finally understanding what you saw from the beginning. The sympathy once extended has curdled into distance. People are no longer defending them, they're documenting the fall. What makes their ongoing rants strangely effective is how they underline everything they hope to disprove. Their refusal to let the issue die has become your greatest witness. Every attempt to discredit you ends up validating you. Their inability to disengage, even in the face of your silence, reveals more about the imbalance inside them than anything they claim about you. The contrast between your stillness and their panic is now unmistakable. Those watching no longer need proof, they're living through it. The divine orchestration is undeniable. What they intended to use against you has become the instrument of your public confirmation. You foresaw the loop before they even entered it. Their addiction to disruption has become its own downfall. They're not operating from logic or intention anymore. They're feeding off chaos because it's the only thing that gives them a pulse. They've built a dependency on attention, even when it's corrosive. And now, even as their world caves in, they continue poking at the ruins, hoping for another flash of noise to keep them from confronting the silence. It's not strategy, it's compulsion dressed up in performance. The real damage wasn't the conflict, it was the isolation that followed. As the cracks deepened, every potential lifeline was severed by their own hand. Advice became an insult. Concern was met with resistance. One by one, the people who could have helped turned away, not out of apathy, but out of necessity. What's left is a ring of nodding faces who offer agreement, not guidance. They don't challenge delusion, they protect it. And in doing so, they shield the collapse just enough to prolong it. This was never about losing friends, it was about rejecting correction. From the start, they removed anyone who dared to tell them the truth. Accountability was never welcome in their space, so only echoes remained. What once might have been a support system transformed into a feedback loop of shared dysfunction. And now, with no grounded voice in reach, they spiral deeper into their own distortions, each choice more reckless than the last, each affirmation more disconnected from reality. The backlash isn't just emotional, it's spiritual erosion. The very tools they tried to twist for harm have turned inward. Not through punishment, but through misalignment. The intentions they released have contaminated the systems they relied on. Clarity becomes rare. Peace becomes unreachable. Struggles multiply in all directions with no clear cause. They're not being haunted, they're being drained by the echo of their own decisions. The energy they once used to attack has formed a loop, feeding on everything they neglected, destroying from within. Some people don't fall from grace, they sprint from it, loudly and defiantly. What was once debated behind closed doors is now broadcast in full view, a mind unraveling with no brakes and no desire to stop. The ongoing spectacle only confirms the wisdom of your detachment. This was never a conflict that required your intervention. It was always going to collapse under its own weight. Distance wasn't retreat, it was discernment. You didn't walk away in weakness. You walked away to protect your peace from something that refused to be reasoned with. Their plan to gather leverage turned inside out without warning. Instead of forming an intelligence web, they built a trap that only caught themselves. The people brought in to be their eyes and ears became silent observers, more fascinated by the descent than invested in the mission. Now, the watchers are documenting, not for justice, but for protection. And what was meant to be a network of influence is now a scattered group bearing witness to a decline they can't interrupt, only record. When manipulation stops working, desperation takes the wheel. You saw it coming before it began. Their tactics didn't intensify, they deteriorated. The mask slipped, not in private, but in public. Calculated actions gave way to erratic swings, subtle digs turned to frantic declarations. Each new attempt less effective than the last, each reaction more revealing. What once looked like strategy now resembles emotional whiplash, exposing everything they tried to hide. Their refusal to quiet down isn't courage, it's combustion. Every word they speak is another fracture in the image they're trying to preserve. Every platform becomes a spotlight, and every spotlight shows the same thing, unraveling disguised as defiance. No one has to accuse them of anything anymore. They've become their own courtroom, their own witness, their own undoing. Persistence, once their weapon, has turned into the clearest proof that they've lost control of the script. They keep going not because they still believe in winning, but because stopping would demand too much honesty. Admitting defeat would force them to confront how much of their life has been built around chasing someone who moved on long ago. The deeper they've dug, the harder it's become to climb out. And now, they keep digging, not for victory, but to avoid seeing how much ground they've already lost. Letting go would mean facing the emptiness left behind. And they're not ready for that silence. Some victories don't come through confrontation, they unfold in silence, under watchful eyes, as alignment does the heavy lifting. The shift you felt wasn't nerves, it was a subtle confirmation from the universe that everything is moving exactly as it should. The turbulence around you hasn't shaken your stance, it's only amplified your stability. The one trying to provoke your fall can't stop broadcasting their failure, because admitting quiet would mean facing the truth. They lost the moment you refused to participate in their chaos. What you're witnessing now is a paradox in motion. The energy that once made them feel powerful has morphed into a signal flare for their unraveling. Their obsession has become a loudspeaker they can't turn off, one that only highlights your unwavering presence. They were allowed to strike not to defeat you, but to reveal you. And now, what remains isn't a story of survival, it's a showcase of how restraint can be louder than retaliation when divinely timed. The difference in your frequency isn't subtle, it's seismic. People don't need explanations anymore. They can feel the imbalance before words are even exchanged. While your posture exudes grounded clarity, their reactions expose a nervous system in free fall. You aren't just responding differently, you're vibrating on an entirely different plane. And that distinction has become impossible to ignore. They keep pushing, unaware that every effort slides off something they can't identify. The defenses around you aren't visible, but their consequences are undeniable. What they release circles back, louder, sharper, undeniable. And they're starting to realize, this isn't a game they can win with louder moves or stronger blows. They're exhausting themselves trying to breach a boundary they were never meant to cross. The downfall you're watching unfold is not random, it's rooted in a desperate dependence. Without your presence to push against, they'd collapse into a silence too unbearable to face. So they keep spinning narratives, keep name-dropping, keep attaching themselves to a version of you that only exists in their pain. But the story's changed. Now they're the only one still writing. Your stillness has become its own mythology. Not because you stopped caring, but because you understood early on that responding would only reduce you. While they've burned through every resource trying to prove a point, you've built something enduring simply by standing still. And the world took notice. You've become the blueprint for what true grace under pressure looks like, steady, elevated, untouched. Proof that some storms end not with noise, but with quiet authority. Some truths don't arrive in thunder, they unfold slowly, with divine accuracy, until there's no doubt left to debate. What's happening now isn't random, it's a deliberate alignment of events revealing everything you sensed long before others could see. They continue speaking because silence would expose too much. But their noise doesn't distract, it confirms. Every exaggerated response only deepens the clarity for those watching. What once seemed like conflict is now unmistakable contrast, and that contrast speaks louder than anything you could have said yourself. Your stability has become more than resilience, it's a mechanism of transformation. Their aggression doesn't land, it redirects. What they intend as sabotage only elevates your visibility. Where they hope to obscure you, they end up clarifying your essence. Their failure to dismantle your presence highlights exactly what makes it untouchable. While they overextend trying to fabricate impact, your silence becomes its own kind of declaration, firm, unmoved, unshakable. These moments have revealed a deeper current running beneath the surface of your journey. You're not in the business of performance or persuasion, you're walking a path designed to prove itself. Every time you chose not to defend, the truth defended you. You never needed to fight back, because your existence already carried evidence. The need for attention couldn't compete with your focus. And now, the lesson becomes visible to everyone else, that real strength is always quiet until it needs to be known.